section, then they divide. So the hematopoietic stem cells, okay, enter into cycle and contribute to hematopoiesis in response to stress, like an infection, as I said, or myelosuppressive chemotherapy. There is reversible switch between dormancy and self-renewal followed by differentiation. So yung differentiation ng hematopoietic stem cells like your neutrophils or your mature lymphocytes have a finite lifespan. So this resides in the bone marrow microenvironment comprising of various types of stromal cells and ECM or extracellular molecules secreted by them. This complex microenvironment forms the specialized hematopoietic stem cell niche, which controls their maintenance, survival, and fate decisions. The hematopoietic stem cells interact and adhere to various niche cells like your mesenchymal stem cells, your osteoblasts, your ECs, as well as with your extracellular molecules secreted by them. And all of this maintain hemostasis within the hematopoietic stem cells will emerge your common myeloid progenitor cells and your common lymphoid progenitor cells. From the common myeloid progenitor cells, eventually they will become your platelets, your red blood cells, and the differential count in your CBC. And from the lymphoid, this will eventually emerge into your B and T cells and NKT cells. So we know the normal hematopoietic stem cells. So let's now discuss the leukemic stem cells. So the constant accumulation of mutations occurring in the hematopoietic stem cells due to ARCH or age-related clonal hematopoiesis. As we age, all of us will acquire somatic mutation as we age, or other agents that can stimulate the transformation of your hematopoietic stem cells into a pre-leukemic tumor cell. Mutations that occur in the pre-leukemic stem cells are related to epigenetic genes that are responsible for histone modification, DNA methylation, and chromatin looping. And this gives the stem cells are usually in quiescent state or G0 to protect them from damage. But the leukemic stem cells, because they gain mutations, they are usually in proliferative state. Okay. So leukemia is a stem cell disease in which self-renewal mechanisms are preserved, but their tight proliferation control is lost due to malignant transformation. And because leukemia is most leukemias is a stem cell disease, that's why it's very hard to cure. And that's why we need a bone marrow transplant to cure most of the leukemia, if not all of the leukemias. So how does leukemia evolve? It is due to poorly regulated or unregulated self-renewal, which is a property that all cancers have. And we call those cells within a cancer that have self-renewal capacity cancer stem progression. So there is block in differentiation. So meaning there's accumulation of immature cells within the bone marrow. The retention or acquisition of self-renewal, as I said, differentiated cells have a finite lifespan. Avoidance of programmed cell death by several independent cell intrinsic pathway by immunosurveillance of the intrinsic and adaptive immune system. T cells are a very powerful cell that recognizes malignancy, but for example, by your T cells. A set of early stem or progenitor cells with extensive proliferation or with reduced programmed cell that are not yet malignant may form pre-leukemic clones. These clones may undergo additional oncogenic events that induce differentiation block at the progenitor stage to become leukemia. Many of the genes overexpressed in leukemias or cancer are driver genes for normal stem cell renewal without differentiation, such as your BMI1, your PTEM, MML, and ROX1. So these are genes that are upregulated So understanding evolution of leukemia and its genomics landscape is essential because we need it for diagnosis. We need it for prognostic factors. There are certain mutations that are very hard to treat. For example, mutations in T53. It will also predict response. There are good and bad prognostic implication of your driver mutations. And it can also be used as monitoring disease response in the form of minimal residual disease. And we can follow up these mutations through, for example, NGS. Of the myeloid cells, we'll now go to the first. So in the course outline, we'll discuss first chronic myeloid leukemia, or the BCR-ABL1 positive malignancy. And then we'll move on to the BCR-ABL myelofibrosis. We'll not be discussing the uncommon ones like the chronic neutrophilic leukemia or chronic eosinophilic leukemia, mastocytosis, and unclassified MPNs. We'll not be discussing those. So CML. So from a stem cell. So in CML, this is classified or can be divided into your chronic phase and advanced disease. In chronic phase, so in CML, it is usually defined by your translocation 922. So when they exchange chromosome material, they produce a protein that is a BCR-ABL, and this induces proliferative advantage. In the chronic phase of CML, the stem cells or the cells are still able to differentiate. But when this disease advances, there is massive, rapid proliferation and cells. And of course, there is increase in your self-renewal. So there is also clonal dominance of the BCR-ABL positive clones, and this outcompetes normal hematopoiesis. CML CD34 positive progenitor cells require less hematopoietic growth factors than do normal progenitors for survival and proliferation. So that's why patients with CML will present with markedly elevated WBC. If it's chronic, there's still preserved differentiation. So you will see in the CBC, there is neutrophil, the molecular basis of CML is the BCR-ABL translocation, or translocation emerging from translocation 922. So there is oligomerization and autophosphorylation, and this triggers different pathway, the STAT, MAP, P13K, and AKT. And this results to genetic modifications within the nucleus, and this results to differentiation and inhibition of apoptosis. So as the disease progressed from the early chronic phase to the accelerated phase. So as we said, diba, this is driven by the BCR-ABL protein. But unfortunately, as the disease progressed, they have less reliance on the BCR-ABL and they still proliferate. And this has an important implication in the way we treat this disease, because we can use targeted treatment to eliminate BCR-ABL. But if the disease progress and they are no longer reliant on the BCR-ABL protein, clinical and laboratory features of CML, knowing its biology. So here I've put an example of a CBC of a patient with chronic myelogenous leukemia. As you can see, the hemoglobin is low because there is marked elevation of your granulocytes. The WBC is 98.8. Platelet can be elevated, usually in the chronic phase. In your myeloid cell lines, neutrophils is increased. There is basophils, 50 to 400, with excess neutrophils, myelocyte, metamyelocyte, basophils present in the peripheral blood. Blast cells can also be present in the chronic phase, but again, as the disease evolves, the cells becomes more immature. There is increasing blast, especially in the blastic phase of chronic myelogenous leukemia. When we do a bone marrow for CML, the bone marrow is very hypercellular with greatly increased white cell production or granulocytic hyperplasia. The ME ratio, or the myeloid to erythroid ratio, is increased. So here we can see this is a bone marrow. This is your neutrophils. This is an eosinophils. You see very few erythroids. This is a mature, almost maturing erythroid. So symptomatically, the patient will describe weight loss, night sweats, and fever. Because weight loss is a result of increased metabolism, and because significant splenomegaly, this compresses on the stomach, the patient is will say that they have a decrease in appetite. Sometimes CML is diagnosed because of an incidental finding from annual physical exam and they don't feel anything. So what are the diagnostic workup for CML? So initially a CBC. So we can diagnose it by looking at the CBC. As I said, some of the patient will not feel anything. Okay. They would also present with a that they have splenomegaly. Bone marrow aspiration is very important to elucidate the characteristic morphologic parameters for CML, like granular 922, and this is determined by a cytogenetic exam or a FISH analysis. I just want to, here in this slide, I just want you to check that there are guidelines in the treatment for CML, and the most prominent one is the NCCN guideline. But knowing the pathophysiology of CML, which is driven by translocation 922, there are medications that target this. First generation is imatinib, but we now have third generation to fourth generation TKIs that are more powerful and or more potent and addresses some mutations that emerges from tyrosine kinase treatment like T315I in the form of asciminib and ponatinib. So usually, CML is treated with targeted regimen. Unlike before, patients are advised to go into transplant to cure this disease. But now for chronic phase, we do targeted treatment. But for advanced phase or blastic phase, we still advise patient to go into chemo reduction. If it's lymphoid, we use chemo induction used for ALL, and for myeloid, we use chemo induction for AML. And then we bring the patient into allogeneic stem cell transplant. Negative. So the MPN, like CML, usually is defined by a driver mutation. For MPN, it's also defined by driver mutation. The most common ones are your JAK2, CARL, and MPL. These are MPN phenotypic mutations. This also drives the bone marrow. So what is the bleeding? And then we need increased production of red blood cell. So your kidney will produce erythropoietin. This will be taken up by a receptor, or it will stimulate a receptor, and it will trigger phosphorylation of your JAK2. And this will send signal into the cell that they need to proliferate or produce more red blood cell. But once a JAK2 is mutated, it no longer needs a hormone or a protein that stimulates the receptor to induce cell signaling. So in MPNs, most common mutation is JAK2, especially for polycythemia vera. So how do we classify this disease? So for polycythemia vera, the most set of patients who are diagnosed with polycythemia vera, but won't have the usual JAK2 mutation, but they will have the JAK2 mutation at exon 12. Okay. So what are the diagnostic criteria for polycythemia vera? So usually there is elevated hemoglobin of more than 16.5 in men, 16 in percent in women. Bone marrow biopsy for polycythemia vera, showing age-adjusted hypercellularity with tri-lineage proliferation, including prominent karyocytes. There is, of course, the presence of your JAK2 V617F or your JAK2 exon 12 in some patient. So when we say age-adjusted hypercellularity, we can compute the cellularity of the bone marrow based on the age. For example, for 20-year-old, usually it's about 80% cellularity, so it's 100 minus 20. For 50, it's 100 minus 50%. So for 50-year-old patients, we know that the cellularity is about 50%. For idiopathic myelofibrosis, the diagnostic criteria is as follows. So for major criteria, opposed cells that produces your platelet. Without reticulin fibrosis, grade more than 1, accompanied by increased age-adjusted bone marrow cellularity. There is granulocytic proliferation and often decreased translocation 922 negative for polycythemia, essential thrombocytosis, and myelodysplastic syndrome. Um, for IMF, there could be JAK2, CARL, and MPL mutation, or the presence of other clonal marker or absence of reactive marrow fibrosis. So you can actually have fibrosis in the bone marrow when you have diseases like tuberculosis or autoimmune disease within the bone marrow. Minor criteria for idiopathic myelofibrosis is anemia not attributed to a comorbid condition, leukocytosis of more than 11, splenomegaly detected clinically or by imaging, meaning clinically by physical examination, you palpated the spleen. LDH level above upper limit of institutional reference range. So how do we sum vera patients usually be splenomegaly? JAK2 mutation 90% of the time is positive. For essential thrombocytosis, there is normal hemoglobin, there is increased platelet, WBC is normal. Splenomegaly is usually not present. There may or may not be JAK2 mutation, usually 40% of the patient. Other mutations related for essential thrombocytosis is your CARL mutation. For idiopathic myelofibrosis, the red blood cell can be elevated and usually the WBC is decreased. But as the fibrosis progresses, usually the patient can present with pancytopenia. That's why the red blood cell platelet and WBC can present variably. Usually, or more often than so here for this slide, I just want to elucidate CBCs of patients with CMPD. So for polycythemia vera, as we've discussed, patient would have an elevated hemoglobin. So for this patient, the patient had an hemoglobin of 20. For males, di ba, ang normal na hemoglobin is 130 to 145 usually. But for this patient, you will see a very much elevated. WBC is 27.8 and the platelet count is 399. Still within normal, but some patients would also present with markedly elevated platelet. For essential thrombocytosis, as you can see, hemoglobin is normal, WBC is normal, but the platelet count is elevated. For essential thrombocytosis, it's very important also to differentiate this with iron deficiency. So females kasi, di ba, were menstruating monthly, so very prone to develop iron deficiency anemia. Because for patients with iron deficiency anemia, you can also have reactive thrombocytosis. But what will give it away is that the hemoglobin is usually low and the MCV is low. So for myelofibrosis, the presentation in the CBC is variable, but when we look at the smear, there could So why is there a teardrop cell? Because of the emergence of fibrosis in the bone marrow. And the patient will present with enlarged spleen. So these are the usual clinical presentation of idiopathic myelofibrosis. PV-ET can eventually progress into IMF, so they have overlapping features, PV-ET and IMF. So they all emerge from the myeloma. Progress to myelofibrosis as well. So the goals of treatment for ET and PV is lowering the risk of thrombosis. So why is there a risk of thrombosis? For several factors. So imagine in your dugo, and at the same time, because what protects us from a thrombotic event primarily is a good blood flow. So imagine if stimulates thrombotic event. For myelofibrosis, our goals of treatment is prolongation of survival and possible cure. So how we offer cure is through a bone marrow transplant. If prolongation of survival or cure is not possible, at least symptom-oriented palliation and quality of life are the main goals. Because ah, medyo choppy. Sorry. Did you hear what hindi ko, ngayon ko lang. Hello? Are we okay now? Naririnig nyo na? Hear na po. Pawala-wala. Okay. But now, is it clear? Yes po, clear. Okay. So we'll continue. Do is to minimize thrombotic event as well as essential thrombocytosis. So for PV, this can be classified as low risk or high risk. For low risk, these are patients who are usually young, no history of a thrombotic event, no comorbidity. So this patient can usually be treated with phlebotomy. Our usual goal is 45% or less as a hematocrit, and they are given low dose aspirin. For high risk patients, it's our patients who are older, who had a history of a thrombotic event. Then we can give them cytoreductive treatment like hydroxyurea, and a new treatment now, not really new, but interferon. And does is that it can decrease disease burden and even decrease the allele burden of your JAK2 mutation. For essential thrombocytosis, it is also prudent that we classify them between low risk and high risk. So for low risk patient, we can give them low dose aspirin, and for high risk patients, we can give them cytoreductive treatment. So for the CMPDs, I'll summarize. So for the BCR-ABL negative, we have three conditions that we discussed: polycythemia vera, essential thrombocytosis, and myelofibrosis. PV and ET can evolve into IMF. Polycythemia vera usually presents with a high hemoglobin or red blood cell, high WBC, and high platelet count. For essential thrombocytosis, they present with high platelet alone. So the management for PV and ET is usually to prevent a thrombotic event because that is the most common cause of their morbidity and mortality. So in order to prevent thrombotic event, we can classify them between high like aspirin, but for high-risk patients, we need to do some form of cytoreduction. But if we want to change the disease course and decrease the allele burden of the mutation, we can offer them interferon. For for myelofibrosis, for a curative option, we can offer early on for some patients allogeneic stem cell transplant. But for those patients who are not candidate for transplant, example for older patient, what we want to do is improve quality of life and prolong their survival as much as possible. There are medications we can give to inhibit the JAK-STAT pathway in the form of ruxolitinib and other JAK2 inhibitors, which are now available in the market. So now we'll move forward to acute myelogenous leukemia. So AML is a clonal disorder of myeloid progenitor cells that may occur in any age, but becomes increasingly common in older people. So why is this common in older age? As we've discussed early on when we were discussing hematopoietic stem cells, we know that we accumulate somatic mutation as we age. It is the most common form of acute leukemia in adult. The disorder leads to infiltration of the bone marrow with immature cells, resulting in impaired production of neutrophils, platelet, and red blood cell. Blast cells frequently appear in the peripheral blood and may derive from any of the lineage. It could be from erythroblasts, myeloblasts, or megakaryoblast. The classification of AML is based on morphology, cytogenetics, immunophenotyping, and clinical behavior. So how does a patient with AML manifest? So they would complain of fatigue. They can have bleeding because of a very low platelet count, anemia because there is proliferation of immature cells within the bone marrow, and that arrests the RBC production from your erythroids. There could be fever. There is some patient can have myeloid sarcoma or circulating blast can form sort of like a solid tumor effect. They may present with DIC, especially in patients with acute promyelocytic leukemia. Patients could have both decrease in WBC as well as hyperleukocytosis. So here at the left side of the slide, I want to presented with low hemoglobin at 9.3. MENTEC will not give us a differential count and will tell us there are immature cells, okay, and a low platelet of 43. The inflammatory markers like CRP or ESR can be elevated as well. So here is, I'd like to show the anatomy of a blast, what we see under the microscope. So as you can see, these are mononuclear cells with you will see nucleoli, and there will be our rods here. This sort of like a rod here in the cytoplasm of the cell. Our rods are also more prominent in patients diagnosed with acute promyelocytic leukemias. So these ones are blasts where the arrows are pointing to. So you will see a lot of this in the bone marrow or even the peripheral blood of a patient with acute myeloid leukemia. So in the diagnosis of AML, it's also very important that we determine the driver mutation because, as I said, this will have prognostic implication. And this can also be used as a way to follow up patients in if they responded to treatment or not. So the way we determine chromosomal abnormality is cytogenetics in FISH. And the way we diagnose phenotype or characteristic or confirm the diagnosis of AML is through flow cytometry because they will express certain cell antigen that is characteristic for AML. Like they would express CD34, which is a immature marker because CD34 is a marker we also use to determine hematopoietic stem cells, especially when we are harvesting cells. We look for CD34. So in AML, as a marker of immaturity, they would have CD34, they would express CD33, and some would express CD117 and CD15. So this is the phenotype characteristic in a flow cytometry for AML. So for myeloblastic, they would usually have CD13, 15, 33, 117, HLA-DR positive, 11B. So we can classify what type of AML based on their immunotypic characteristic, and this is determined by flow cytometry. So AML is also defined by the driver mutation they are harboring. So there are certain AML defining translocations. What does it mean? Because you diagnose AML if there is more than 20% plus, but it could be lesser if there is AML defining cytogenetic abnormalities in the form of translocation 821 in version 16 and patients diagnosed with APL or translocation 1517, which will result into a protein called PML-RARA. Okay, so these three types of AML usually harbor a good prognosis, and usually it's enough to treat them with chemotherapy. But again, caveat, because there are certain mutations that can go with translocation 821, example, a c-KIT mutation, and that already classifies the patient as high risk. Although usually these patients would have good prognosis with chemotherapy alone, but again, there are certain mutations that can go with this, and that immediately classifies them as high risk. Patients with APL, PML-RARA would usually have a good prognosis, and we treat them with ATRA and ATO, and they have a very good response. And we usually don't need transplant for patients with acute promyelocytic leukemia. So here I just want to summarize the favorable, intermediate, and poor adverse cytogenetic or molecular mutations for acute myeloid leukemia. So for intermediate risk, these patients would usually have a normal cytogenetics, but when we do NGS analysis, they would usually have a mutated MPN. Other intermediate risks are translocation 911. And for the rest, like for example, in version 3, translocation 69, complex karyotype, or have mutations in AXL1 and mutations in T53 would have a very poor prognosis. And sometimes even with transplant, they have a poor prognosis, especially T53 mutation. We don't know yet what to do with patients with T53 because even with transplant, they relapse early on. So what are the treatment for acute myeloid leukemia? First is we do induction chemotherapy with the purpose of tumor debulking. In choosing induction chemotherapy, we consider age, performance status, risk of the disease, comorbidity. Then eventually, if once a patient is in remission, we move into consolidation chemotherapy. We eliminate remaining tumor, or as a form of consolidation, we do allogeneic stem cell transplant. So we do offer transplant to all patients, but except for elderly patients who are very frail or patients with good risk prognosis like translocation 821, version 16, and patients with acute promyelocytic leukemia. So when we give chemotherapy, of course, we should be able to assess if they are in remission or not. You don't have to memorize this. I just want to elucidate the ways we determine how patients are responding to chemotherapy. It could be by morphology, flow cytometry, and even MRD through molecular testing like NGS-PCR. For example, we can determine patients if they are NPM1 positive, and we can follow up this patient if we are able to eliminate that mutation as a form of MRD. So we now move on to myelodysplastic syndrome. So we've already discussed AML. So MDS is a serious, relatively common disorder in which bone marrow is populated by a clone of abnormal hematopoietic cells. So why is it relatively common, especially in the elderly? As I said, all all of us will have somatic mutation as we age. It could be clonal mutation that does not result into disease, but over time, once accumulated, it can eventually result to abnormal clones within the bone marrow. Could be disease causing, or it could just stay as clonal hematopoiesis of indeterminate significance. These cells are dysplastic and are able to mature normally when we do develop myelodysplastic syndrome. These are a heterogeneous group of clonal stem cell disorder characterized by ineffective hematopoiesis and a variable tendency to progress to acute myelogenous leukemia. So increasingly, MDS is diagnosed incidentally with modest abnormal blood counts, which triggers a bone marrow examination. So sometimes most of the patient won't feel anything, but when you look at the CBC, there's slight anemia, there's slightly decreased WBC, and there's slightly decreased platelet. It could be just the hemoglobin, it could just be the WBC or the platelet, and there's no other conditions that will explain these cytopenias. So MDS is related to accumulation of somatic mutation in the hematopoietic stem cells. In majority of cases, 85% it is de novo, or secondary in 50% of isomerase inhibitors like etoposide, and ionizing radiations are clearly etiologic. So meaning, for example, patients with breast cancer, diba, they receive radiation after chemotherapy or surgery. And we know that the bone marrow is related here in the sternum and in the pelvic area. So for patients with radiotherapy, patients receiving radiotherapy in the chest area or the pelvic area, eventually, possible, they have a higher risk of developing MDS in the future. MDS is a highly heterogeneous group of disorder. It has a variable natural history, variable mortality rate. Low risk patients with MDS can still live up to a decade. There is variable response to treatment. The common cause of death for this patient is progression to bone marrow failure or conversion to acute myelogenous leukemia. Because there is ineffective production of cells, that's why bone marrow failure. There is patient can present with low hemoglobin, making them transfusion dependent, low WBC, making them prone to infection, or low platelet, resulting to bleeding. So as I said, this is a sort of an evolving disease. It could start with clonal hematopoiesis of indeterminate significance. Usually patients will not have cytopenias, but there will be mutations. Risk of transformation is positive, but it could be very low, like 0.5 to 1% per year. And it can evolve eventually to high-risk CCUS and eventually myelodysplastic syndrome. Treatment for CCUS, ICUS, or this evolving condition is still not well established, but are still within clinical trials. Okay. So how do we classify MDS? Again, you don't have to memorize this, but again, I just want to show there are different types of MDS. How we classify them is based on the mutations that we find and the presentation of the patient. For example, MDS with refractory anemia with ring sideroblast. So patients would present with significant anemia. When we do a bone marrow, there's dysplasia in the erythroid line. And when we do iron staining, we will elucidate ring sideroblast, or parang accumulation of the iron around the nucleus. So how we diagnose MDS is through bone marrow studies. In most cases, there are bone marrow changes, including hypercellularity, still with trininage, but there's dysplastic features. A small number of patients may have hypocellular marrow. This often overlaps with aplastic anemia. The pathophysiology of aplastic anemia is usually immune-mediated, but because clonally or mutated cells that define myelodysplastic syndrome are resistant to immune attacks. So usually they emerge when there is concomitant aplastic anemia or hypocellular marrow, especially for patients who are older. There could be increased marrow fibrosis, which may be confused with other myeloproliferative disorder. There is dysplastic changes in the RBC lineage, and this is characterized by dyserythropoiesis. There is absence of B12 and folic acid deficiency, because when you do have this deficiency, it can result to dysplastic changes in the bone marrow as well. The bone marrow usually exhibit a synchronous maturation of nuclei and cytoplasm, similar to what is described in megaloblastic anemia. Other changes like binuclearity or multinuclearity in the erythroid cell line precursor cells are also seen, and the presence of ring sideroblasts. So we also need to do FISH cytogenetics to elucidate chromosomal abnormality, and NGS for patients with small mutations like, for example, AXL1 mutation, DMT3A mutation, P53, etc. We also need to differentiate patients with megaloblastic anemia through vitamin B12 assay and folic acid assay. PNH flare, because this or paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria can have overlapping features of MDS, or you can have PNH clone with MDS. As with all hematologic malignancy, we want to determine their prognosis through scoring system. Again, you don't have to memorize this, but what is included in the prognostic factors are the cytogenetic abnormalities, the percent of blasts, and the severity of the cytopenia, meaning anemia, thrombocytopenia, or decrease in WBC. So that's how we define the prognostic factors in myelodysplastic syndrome. So what are the treatment considerations for MDS? So MDS, unfortunately, is curable without stem cell transplant, but the history is variable. So as I said, low-risk patients can live for more than a decade. So sometimes we just do watch and wait for this patient. Treatment consideration must take into account many factors, including pathologic diagnosis. There are certain cytogenetic abnormality like 5q that are sensitive to certain treatment like lenalidomide. The prognosis is based on the IPSS or WPS scoring, and I've shown this in the previous slide. And the factors that are included here are the level of cytopenia, cytogenetic abnormality, and the number of blasts. And because there is no cure, there are so the treatment of the MDS, our goals is to improve quality of life if we can. Like lenalidomide, for example, in 5q mutated patients as a cytidine as a form of hypomethylating agent. And we can change the history of the disease through an allogeneic stem cell transplant. There are now new treatments that target certain molecules that arrest erythropoiesis in the form of luspatercept, and this is very effective in patients with MDS with ring sideroblasts or certain mutations like SF3B1 mutation. So the realm of MDS is moving forward. We do have a lot of clinical trials abroad, not here, that looks into how can we improve the overall survival of myelodysplastic syndrome. And going in the lymphoid cells. So just an overview, lymphocytes can be divided into three main classes of effector cells: the B cells, T cells, and natural killer cells. So for this lecture, we'll only discuss mostly about B cells and just touch briefly on T cell lymphoma. So B cells are effector cells of the humoral immunity. Their function is to produce antibodies and are thought to arise in the bone marrow. where they begin life as a blast cell and mature in the peripheral lymphoid tissue to become antibody producing plasma cells. T cells are effector cells of the cell mediated immunity, precursor of organ development, sort of trains the T cells to recognize self and non-self. And if there's dysregulation in that step, autoimmune disorder can emerge. Lack B and T cell markers and were previously referred to as null cells. We know that how T cells recognizes a virally or a abnormal cell is through an MHC receptor, as opposed to your NKT cells. It doesn't need an abnormal peptide being mounted to your MHC receptor. So it's like an NKT cells functioning like attack an abnormally infected cell or a normal cell that transform into a cancer. So the B cell and development starts from the bone marrow most of its life, and then it emerges into your peripheral blood, going into your lymph nodes, where it becomes a cell that produces antibody. And as I said, your T cell, usually from the bone marrow, then it goes to your thymus to be trained to recognize self and non-self, and it further subdivides into your CD4 or CD8 subset and T regulatory T cells. So what are lymphomas? These are clonal malignant disorders that are derived from lymphoid cells, either a precursor of a mature T or B cells. They are divided in is diagnosed histologically by the presence of your Reed-Sternberg cells within the appropriate cellular background. Lymph unknown, although certain types of types are associated with specific infectious agents or chronic antigen. Large B-cell lymphoma. HTLV1 can be associated with T-cell lymphoma, and H. pylori can be associated with certain gastric lymphoma like maltoma. So here I just want to tell you that there are different classifications of lymphomas, more than 40 types, for example, for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And each type of this lymphoma would have different biology and sometimes how we treat them. You don't need to memorize all of this, but I just want to tell you there are many types of lymphoma. So in diagnosing this, when we treat this, ideally we need to know the specific type of lymphoma to predict prognosis, treatment, and even the specific treatment that we're going to use for the patient. So lymphoma cytogenetic and molecular consideration. So cytogenetic analysis has identified a number of specific recurring abnormalities that are associated with certain lymphomas. The alteration of expression of genes involved in cell proliferation, cell differentiation, and apoptosis results from specific genetic alterations. For example, for follicular lymphoma, it can result from translocation 1418. For Burkitt's lymphoma, it's 814, and for mantle cell, it's 1114. You will know usually these are B-cell lymphoma because of the affectation of chromosome 14, where we find the gene for your immunoglobulin. So it's in chromosome 14. So what are the clinical manifestations of lymphoma? Many will present with a lump or mass where the lymph nodes are located. Lymphomas are great mimickers of other disease like tuberculosis, but TB is also a mimicker. Lymphoma can also be a great mimicker. They may present with weight loss, fever, and sweats. Pruritus is another symptom that should offer an alert for the diagnosis of lymphoma. For example, in Hodgkin's lymphoma, there is reactive eosinophilia, and we know that eosinophils releases histamine, and this can cause pruritus. About 60% of lymphomas may involve the lymph nodes. Remaining 40% may involve any organ of the body. Clinicians often divide lymphoma into low and high grade. So we know that there are different types of lymphoma, and this can also be classified whether it's high grade or low grade. Low grade lymphomas have low proliferation rate and can be controlled with chemotherapy, but are incurable. So these examples of which are follicular lymphoma or CLL. High grade lymphomas rapidly fatal if left untreated, but can sometimes be cured. Example are Burkitt's and diffuse large B-cell lymphomas. So in the diagnosis of lymphoma, we need an adequate sample from a lymph node. So ideally, we need excision biopsy. But of course, there are lymph nodes that are very hard to reach or unable to excise, then maybe we can just do a CT scan guided biopsy. We need to identify whether this is B cell or T cell and certain cytogenetic or molecular abnormalities. And this can be determined, as I said, by cytogenetic testing, FISH or NGS. We need to determine the fitness of the patient for chemotherapy, hence other diagnostic tests like an EKG, laboratory tests determining their kidney or liver function, and underlying hepatitis B that can emerge during chemotherapy. So most of these tests are determined the type of lymphoma, molecular mutation, and the fitness of the patient to undergo chemotherapy. So the lymphoma treatment usually composes of different modalities. They could have chemotherapy, radiation, antibody treatment in the form of monoclonal antibodies like rituximab that target CD20. Bone marrow transplantation can be used for patients who did not respond to chemotherapy. There are now bispecific that engages the antigen in the surface of the cancer cells and T cells. Cellular therapy in the form of CAR T cells. So for example, in relapsed diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, we use a combination of chemotherapy plus autologous stem cell transplant for patients who are late relapsers. But for patients with early relapse, it's now recommended to do CAR T cells. So what are CAR T cells? These are autologously derived T cells from the patient who was diagnosed with a lymphoma. And this is genetically engineered to express a CAR receptor in its surface targeting a certain antigen. So it could be CD19 for B cells. For other malignancies, like for example, multiple myeloma, the T cells can express a CAR specifically for BCMA that is expressed in plasma cell or malignant plasma cells. So for diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, it could be a usually combination of chemotherapy, and to assess response, we can do imaging like CT PET. So the treatment can also be PET directed. So usually after 3 cycles, we check if the patient is responding, and we determine if we should continue chemotherapy or escalate treatment to cellular therapy or a bone marrow transplant. So we've discussed lymphomas. Now we proceed to the more immature type, the acute lymphoblastic leukemias. So ALL usually represents the most common pedia malignancy, accounting for approximately 25% of childhood cancer. The peak prevalence occur between ages 2 to 5 years and about 50 years old. There is slight male predominance. So what are the risk factors for ALL? Certain conditions predisposed to ALL, most notably Down syndrome. Other includes immunodeficiency or chromosomal breakage syndromes, but most often no such underlying condition is found. So what are the symptoms of ALL? There is lymphoblast infiltration of the bone marrow with resultant blood count abnormalities. So here at the left side, a sample again of a patient with ALL. So the hemoglobin is 9.3. There is markedly elevated WBC and platelet is low. So as you can see, if you remember from ALL, they could have the same CBC result. So sometimes we don't know what type of acute leukemia the patient had unless we look at the peripheral blood smear or we do a flow cytometry. Patients with ALL will present with some of them with splenomegaly, lymphadenopathy, and a markedly elevated LDH. So I know this is small, but I just want to tell you that there are a lot of if there is presence of extramedullary disease, because this type of leukemia can infiltrate the brain, and the risk for tumor lysis because of the high proliferative rate or the high tumor burden. When we do chemotherapy, the patient is at risk for TLS. So these diagnostic tests are meant to assess the following factors. So again, like AML, we can do immunophenotyping of this patient through flow cytometry. So for example, for ProBA, CD22. So this is how we classify AML, and this could be determined by flow cytometry. Very important in this disease is that we do cytogenetic analysis. For example, there is de novo ALL that is driven by translocation 922 that we see in CML, but the mutation or the exon mutation could be different from CML. Usually in CML, it's P210, but in ALL, it's usually P190 mutation in the BCR-ABL. So like other hematologic malignancy, we classify them whether standard risk or poor risk based on their molecular or cytogenetic mutation. So poor risk patients would usually have, again, T53 mutation, KMT2A rearrangement or translocation 411. They could have the zinc finger mutation, T384 rearrangement, and etc. So we also treat ALL through combination chemotherapy. Usually it's through induction, intensification, consolidation, maintenance. Now there are new data that tells us that maybe chemotherapy is not the best option. Some patients with BALL responds more to immunotherapy like Blincyto that targets CD19. Those are bispecific antibody conjugates that attaches to CD19 and T cells. And we know that T cells are very powerful cells that kills cancer. There are drugs that are drug conjugate, so they have a payload of chemotherapy like inotuzumab. It's a CD22 drug conjugate, and with it comes with chemotherapy. We also use allogeneic stem cell transplant, especially for adult patients, and radiotherapy if there's extramedullary disease or CNS involvement. So we've discussed lymphomas and ALL. We now go to the last cell, which is multiple myeloma that affects the plasma cells that emerge. Differentiated B lymphocytes. These are your plasma cells that produces antibodies. There's deregulation of plasma cell biology as a result of somatic cell mutation, which drives the asymptomatic states of MGUS, smoldering multiple myeloma to multiple myeloma. Multiple genetic abnormalities have been identified that contribute to the genesis and progression to multiple myeloma. So it can start with MGUS, moving towards smoldering and eventually multiple myeloma. So these are the characteristics of each stage. For multiple myeloma, there is already CRAB, because of the high levels of light chains that is produced from this disease. And there could be bone affectations or lytic lesions in the bone, which can be elucidated by an MRI, a CT PET, or a whole body CT scan. So the diagnostic criteria based on the IMWG criteria. So presence of serum or urine monoclonal protein. Monoclonal protein are because when plasma cells become clonal or malignant, they produce just one type of diversified are heavy. They can increase the viscosity of the blood. Light chains that are produced from the plasma cells can cause renal damage as well. Evidence of end organ damage that can be attributed to the underlying plasma cell proliferation. So this is summarized by the CRAB criteria, which includes hypercalcemia, renal affectation, anemia, and bone lesions. The clinical features and diagnostic tests used to diagnose multiple myeloma, so the patient can have different clinical presentation. Sometimes the patients can be asymptomatic. So we just determine in the CBC, there's slight anemia for an elderly patient or slight thrombocytopenia. And when we do a creatinine, some bone pains, usually in the axial skeleton, or patients can have frequent infection, or the patient can start with amyloidosis. Amyloidosis light chains can deposit in the kidneys. It could be kappa or lambda, but the most common is lambda light chain. Hyperviscosity can result because monoclonal proteins are heavy proteins in the plasma, and it can cause high viscosity in the blood. Diagnostic tests that we can do are CBCs. Hepatitis profile is important because in the treatment, there could be reemergence of hepatitis B if the patient has latent hepatitis B infection. Bone marrow is very important, cytogenetics, elucidating whether there is to determine if there's excretion of a monoclonal protein. Bone disease can be determined by MRI, low-dose CT, and a PET scan. So how we risk stratify patients with AML? So there's already a new T53 mutation, translocation 414, gain of function of 1q, and of course, patients who are frail, patients with high tumor burden, patients presenting with plasma cell leukemia are high-risk patients. So in newly diagnosed transplant-eligible patients, when we do diagnose patients with multiple myeloma, we need to classify whether they are transplant-eligible or non-transplant eligible. So ideally, we want to decrease the tumor load as fast as possible, achieving very good partial response or better. We determine if they are transplant eligible, as I said, and then we want to maintain or improve their quality of life and increase their progression-free survival, meaning number of years they are alive without chemotherapy. So as I said, we can classify patients whether they are transplant eligible or not. For transplant eligible patients, our goal is to decrease the tumor load, induce complete remission or very good partial response, do a autologous stem cell transplant, and then eventually maintain the patient. This is how we treat multiple myeloma because as of this time, multiple myeloma is still an incurable disease. So I just want to present the NCCN guidelines for multiple myeloma for transplant eligible or non-transplant eligible patient. You don't need to memorize this. I just want to elucidate that multiple myeloma is treated with a combination of chemotherapy targeting different um, causes of disease. For example, daratumumab is a monoclonal antibody that targets CD38 in the surface of plasma cells. Bortezomib is a proteasome inhibitor, which is very active in plasma cells because of their antibody production capacity. And other targeted drugs like lenalidomide. Lenalidomide is a drug that inhibits apoptosis. It also increases T cells recognizing clonally mutated plasma cells. Okay. These are the correct definition of treatment response. So it could be stringent CR to partial response or stable disease. And we determine the response after combination of treatment. So our goal is to induce complete remission, or now we want to induce minimal residual disease. So we've already finished discussing multiple myeloma, so I'd like to give a brief introduction on hematopoietic stem cells transplant. Okay. So stem cells, we know stem cells is a valuable treatment for almost all hematologic malignancy. So this is formally called, or in conjunction with, bone marrow transplantation. So this is transplantation of multipotent hematopoietic stem cells, usually derived from the bone marrow of a donor, peripheral blood, or an umbilical cord. So what is the objective of a stem cell transplant? It is to rescue a patient with cancer from toxic effects of high-dose chemotherapy or radiation therapy. So this first principle talks about autologous stem cell transplant. So because in autologous stem cell transplant, we use high doses of chemotherapy, like high-dose melphalan in patients with multiple myeloma. And if you don't rescue them with stem cells, they remain to be ablated, or they will present like aplasia in the bone marrow. So in order for the patient to tolerate that or multiple blood with severe immunodeficiency, or they lack B cells in children, so you can rescue them with a donor hematopoietic stem cells. It can increase the control of malignant disease by cancer cells. So by giving donor T cells to a patient who was previously diagnosed with ALL or AML, those donor T cells can recognize emerging cancer cells. So stem cell transplant is the first immunotherapy that was done. Nowadays, we have cellular therapies like CAR T cells. Transplant can also reset the immune system to abolish autoimmunity. So what are the classifications of hematopoietic stem cell transplant? Could be autologous from the patient's own blood or marrow. Can be allogeneic from another person. It could be related or unrelated who has a suitable HLA match. So when we do HLA matching, we do from class 1 and class 2 MHC. So these are, class 1 is your A, B, C, and for class 2, it's DR, DP, and DQ. So what are the challenges of transplant we have in the Philippines? So there's only about 5 centers who are doing this. Medical City, where I work, St. Luke's, National Kidney, and Makati Med. Doing stem cell transplant in the Philippines. And doing important in the transplant process because they are the ones who are um, processing our stem cells. Availability of unrelated donor registry, we don't have that in the Philippines. And of course, the financial cost of a stem cell transplant, it could be very prohibitive. With that, thank you so much. There are any, I think we still have time for questions. So all the questions from the exam will come from the slides. So I won't ask questions that was not mentioned in the lecture. So most of the questions for the exam are usually case based. So I will give a case, and then usually you will just provide a diagnosis or appropriate treatment for that disease. Yes, you can have a copy of the slides. I'll send it sa secretary ng IM to be disseminated. Okay. Questions? Okay, so there's a question. How do you identify low, high risk PV, ET, and IMF? Okay, so for high risk PV and ET, so generally based on age, for more than 60 years old, those are usually high risk. Patients with comorbidities such as hypertension, those are high risk patients. Patients who had a previous thrombotic event, those are high risk patients. For myelofibrosis, usually this patient would have high risk features. For example, they have um, certain cytogenetic abnormalities that would portend a more aggressive disease like AXL1 mutation. Those patients are high risk, and those patients would probably need a transplant. So parang sinasabi ko is for IMF, you need cytogenetic or molecular testing to determine the high-risk patients. But of course, rapidly progressing patients, like for example, they have cytopenias and large spleens, those are high-risk patients already. Also, there are also certain cytogenetic abnormalities that would portend high-risk patients. For example, di ba I told you, JAK2 mutation is positive in 90% of the patient, but there are triple negative, or we don't see negative for for MPL, CARL, or JAK2. And sometimes those patients are also high risk. So they are defined by clinical presentation and molecular mutation that this disease is harbor. But generally for PV and ET, it's age, comorbidity, or previous thrombotic event. And for IMF, it's usually mutations and clinical presentation of patient that will determine whether they are high or low risk. Thank you. Are there any more questions? I know it's a lot. Usually takes 3 years for a fellow to study all of this, and we're discussing it in 1 hour. You have tips on how to study the... Okay. Do you... How to best study the topic po? For this topic, it's best that you just review the slides. If you notice all of the hematologic malignancy, di ba, paulit-ulit, I discussed with you that the recurring theme of everything of this, the recurring theme of all the disease is that there's genetic abnormality. Okay? For the myeloid, they emerge from the myeloid line. And kung iisipin nyo, like for the PV, ET, IMF, for the PV, it's easy to remember. Increased red blood cell, increased WBC, increased platelet. If you are given a case na increase lang yung platelet, that's essential thrombocytosis. If I give you a case na malaki yung spleen, mababa yung hemoglobin, the WBC is slightly elevated, there's teardrop cell, then probably that's idiopathic myelofibrosis. So there are key clinical presentation that will differentiate each disease. When I tell you there's translocation 922, it's easy. That's already chronic myelogenous leukemia. If I tell you there's mass, the patient's presenting mass, that's probably lymphoma versus an ALL. Okay. And then I've discussed the immunotyping of the different acute leukemia. So if there's positive CD33 or CD15, CD34, that's ALL as opposed to ALL, sorry. AML is CD33, 34, 33, and 15. For ALL, it's CD19 positive, CD79A. So those are ALL patients. Okay. Both acute leukemias are treated with combination chemotherapy and eventually consolidated with a bone marrow transplant. Thank you. Okay. So I'll just wait for maybe 2 more minutes if there are students who are typing their questions, and after which maybe we can call it a day, if that's okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. No more questions? Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you po.
Thank you,
you.
Doc.
Thank you.
Thank you po, Doc.
Doc.